All right, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Housing Urban Affairs Committee. I'm Councilman John Bullock, chair of the committee. Before we get started, I want to introduce our colleagues. To my left, vice chair of the committee, Yitzi Schleifer of the 5th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Also, Councilman Bill Henry of the 4th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Z. Cohen, 1st District. Councilman Chris Burnett of the 8th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let's see. Also, all members of the committee, also joined by Councilman Eric Costello of the 11th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Also joined by staff to the committee, Richard Crummert. And then we also have our agency representatives and also representatives from the Council President's Office and legislative staff. So we appreciate you being here as well. Do want to go ahead and get started. We do have a fairly packed agenda. So with that being said, the first bill that we are going to be hearing is City Council Bill 190432, Ordinance Campaign Signs in Residential Areas, Repeal of Early State Requirement. A sponsor of the bill is Vice Chair of the committee, Councilman Schleifer. Would you like to say a few words before we get started?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. So I was contacted by a constituent regarding Subtitle 46 in the police ordinance, and it was brought to my attention that the rules that govern this ordinance have been ruled unconstitutional. In speaking with the law department, who I'm sure will speak to it as well, they have determined that Subtitle 46 in total is unconstitutional, and so what we're looking to do today is to repeal this code so that there's no confusion, and that we can bring our ordinances up to date. You ready for motion?
Agencies, do you stand by your reports? Any comments?
Can I?
The law is favorable with the amendment, and police has no objection.
Yeah, I can just ask one question. Sure. I just have one question, if I may. So from housing, when was the last time this ordinance has been enforced?
And please come to the microphone. I know that one's not. Yes. And as you're coming, we're also been joined by Councilwoman Shannon Sneed, 13th District, member of the committee.
Jason Hessler, Baltimore City Department of Housing Community Development. Councilman, to the best of my knowledge, we have not issued any citations or notices for a violation of this section, particularly with posting too early or too late, since at least 2007, because it was removed from our violation index so that inspectors or investigators could not even select it to issue a notice or citation. I don't have a record prior to 2007. So I don't know, if it happened, it wouldn't have been very frequently prior to 2007, but it has not happened since 2007.
Okay, so for at least the past 12 years, there has not been any citations written on this?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to make a motion to strike Subtitle 46 from the police code.
So you're moving the law department amendment?
Yeah, I'm moving all law department amendments to strike the entire ordinance.
Is there a second? Second. All right, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
Okay.
Abstentions?
Okay. We're ready for a motion to move the bill favorable as amended.
All right. Is there a motion to move the bill favorable as amended?
I'd like to move it favorable as amended.
Second.
Was that second Cohen? Second by Cohen.
All right. Chairman Bullock.
Yes.
Chairman Bullock votes aye. Vice Chair Schleifer.
Yes.
Vice Chair Schleifer votes aye. Mr. Burnett.
Aye.
Mr. Burnett votes aye. Mr. Cohen.
Yes.
Mr. Cohen votes aye. Mr. Dorsey appears to be absent. Mr. Henry.
Aye.
Mr. Henry votes aye. Member Sneed.
Yes.
Member Sneed votes aye. Mr. Chairman, there's 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. We can go to second read at the next meeting if there's desire to committee.
All right, thank you. All right, the next bill in front of us is scheduled for 3:40 p.m. and it's about that time. It is City Council Bill 190158R, resolution approval for the exchange of Class BD7 license to a Class A7 license at 1503 to 1505 Light Street. The sponsor of the bill, Councilman Eric Costello, is here. Would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2018, Senate Bill 519 was passed into law. This bill authorizes the Board of Liquor Commissioners for the city to issue an A7 beer, wine, and liquor license, which authorizes the holder to sell alcoholic beverages for off-premises consumption at certain times, providing that license holders who hold a certain class of license are eligible to exchange that license for a Class A7 license under certain circumstances, specifying that specifically in the 46th Legislative District, a Class BD7 license may be exchanged for a Class A7 license only under certain circumstances. I have a letter of support from the Riverside Neighborhood Association, which I'd like to submit for the record. This is basically a establishment which has been a strong community partner, Jen's Place, who is looking to downgrade their BD7 license to an A7 license. Full community support. I obviously support it and would respectfully ask for my colleagues' support. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you, Councilman. And then looking at our agencies, again, we have either no objection or favorable. Do all the agencies stand by their reports? Any additional comments or questions from our colleagues? Or any testimony? All right, is there a motion? Anybody want to move the bill?
So moved.
Moved by Cohen, second by Snead.
Chairman Bullock.
Yes.
Chairman Bullock votes aye. Vice Chair Schleifer.
Yes.
Vice Chair Schleifer votes aye. Mr. Burnett.
Yes.
Mr. Burnett votes aye. Mr. Cohen.
Yes.
Mr. Cohen votes aye. Mr. Dorsey is absent. Mr. Henry.
Aye.
Mr. Henry votes aye. Member Snead.
Yes.
Member Snead votes aye. Mr. Chair, there's 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. We can go to second read at the next meeting.
All right, thank you. And now the moment you've all been waiting for, or at least most of you, we are now going to be hearing City Council Bill 190148, our resolution informational hearing, mold in housing. Obviously, this has been a significant issue within our city, and thank you to Councilman Henry for bringing this to the forefront. Councilman Henry, would you like to say a few words as the sponsor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, at this point now, a couple years ago, when Housing and I set out to do the expansion of rental licensure from multifamily to include single-family homes, we had some very early conversations with a number of tenants advocates about things that they wanted to see in the inspection list. And one of them was mold. They wanted to make certain that that would be one of the things that the city looked for. What we explained at the time was that the understanding we had going into that process of expanding rental inspection and licensure to include single-family homes was at that point going to be just about taking what the existing housing code had and making sure that that applied to single-family properties as well as multifamily. But we invited the advocates to come back to the council and raise specific issues about things that ought to be in the housing code that weren't already. And so the first one of these that we're taking up is the issue of mold. And I wanted to be clear because I had had a little bit of a preview through those conversations about how big of a topic this is that we're getting into. I didn't want to dive right in with a bill saying we need to do this or we need to do that. What I wanted to do is I just wanted to start by informing my colleagues about what this issue is and make certain that there was an opportunity for both experts in individual parts of this field and for people who have been injured through exposure to mold to have an opportunity for them to come in and share their stories with the council. And then after we learn a little bit about the topic, then, Mr. Chair, my hope is that the committee can pursue further conversations and try to figure out how the city should be addressing this from a regulatory perspective. But I want to thank you very much for this hearing. I thank my colleagues for joining us, and I look forward to hearing the reactions from the public. Thank you.
All right, so again, fortunately, we've been joined by the city agencies who really will be touching this issue. Obviously, we have law, finance, health department, most certainly, and then housing and community development, as well as the housing authority and general services. Is there any, I believe there's testimony from our agency, so do you want to start with housing or health? How about housing? See Stephanie Murdoch coming to us. As you come again, please, state your name and affiliation, and we'll be waiting for your testimony.
Hello, Stephanie Murdoch here with the Department of Housing and Community Development. I'm joined here today with two of our deputy commissioners, Deputy Commissioner Kennedy and Deputy Commissioner Hessler. DHCD is in support of the council's efforts to learn about agency functions related to mold in housing and its potential health impacts. DHCD has multiple tools to address mold. DHCD's Division of Home Ownership and Housing Preservation offers several programs to assist owners of eligible owner-occupied properties with repairs to address many health and safety issues. One of such programs is weatherization. Not only does weatherization improve energy efficiency and help lower utility bills, but it helps make homes safer by addressing health and safety issues such as mold and asbestos. The division's Lead Hazard Reduction Program and Office of Rehabilitation Services, ORS, also assist residents in addressing mold in their home. These programs can be applied for through one common application, the LIGHT application. The city's Lead Hazard Reduction Grant from HUD is a way to help deliver healthy home dollars. One of our other tools is through DHCD's Division of Housing, Code Enforcement, and Emergency Operations. Our inspectors will go out and inspect for the appearance of mold and then issue a unsanitary nuisance notice, which gives the homeowner 10 days to address the mold issue. For failure to abate the issue can lead to the issuance of a citation with a $250 price tag. Now, our inspectors do not test for mold, but they will cite for the appearance of mold and issue a notice or citation to the appropriate property owner. I'm going to ask Alice Kennedy to talk a little bit about some of the different programs available to help owner-occupied properties address mold and prevent mold in the future.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So as Stephanie stated, we do have a number of programs available under the Division of Homeownership and Housing Preservation that can assist homeowners and in some instances tenants with mold remediation. One of the first things to note is that our weatherization auditors and our rehab techs and our lead risk assessors, when they go out, we are not trained within city government within those programs to actually identify and test for mold, and we don't do that. We can't say that we walk into a house and there's definitely mold over here. We go on that there's an appearance of possible mold that could be present in the home, and that would require, in order to determine exactly if it is mold and what that growth is, to have mold testing and then essential remediation done at that point. With weatherization, there are some limited health and safety dollars that can be used towards mold remediation, asbestos remediation, proper air ventilation, bathroom fans, and removal of knob and tube wiring. I will say that those limited dollars that are provided by the weatherization program, often in a home, cannot cover all of the additional health and safety costs that would be associated with weatherizing that home. So often, if we go in and there is the appearance of asbestos or the appearance of mold, knob and tube wiring, the health and safety dollars that are allotted per the grant funding are not enough to cover those issues given the housing stock that we have in Baltimore. And when that happens, we actually have to defer that case, and we are not able to help because we have limited funds and don't have the matching funds available to do and complement the grant funds to be able to have that house be able to move forward through the weatherization process. So while we do have funds, it's limited, and we have addressed mold using those funds in the past. The same is true for the lead hazard reduction program. There are healthy home funding and dollars available through the lead hazard reduction program that we can couple. But if we go into a home and there's a number of different issues that we're not able to get through for the lead hazard reduction, then we wouldn't be able to utilize those healthy home dollars for mold remediation in that instance. The Office of Rehabilitation Services offers, we have loan money and sometimes grant money that is used and can be used to assist owners with remediating mold if they have an issue. But the majority of time, we have a lot of people that are contacting us for rehab services that need roofing issues. And that would be one thing that I'd want to bring up here, is that in any house, especially a Baltimore row home, whether or not it is owner occupied or tenant occupied, I always like to say that an Achilles heel of the Baltimore row home is the roof. And we have a tremendous number of residents in the city that have roofing issues. And if we don't address roofing issues and core root causes of potential mold growth and mildew growth, then we actually wouldn't be able to get ahead of this. To give you an idea, right now we have over 700, I think as of 45 minutes ago, there are 727 applications in our light intake and assessment application pipeline. And out of those 727 applications, I would say that at least 60%, if not higher, are contacting us for roofing concerns. And then the next places where you can have the mold, what we see within those programs of rehab, lead, and weatherization, the next obvious issue outside the roof would be any plumbing leaks that occur in the home and or groundwater infiltration that comes in if you don't have a sump pump or if your sump pump's not working. So we get a lot of those as well. So I would say that anything that is looked at as it relates to mold growth, to make sure to think about what the root causes are and figure out how to ensure that those root causes are addressed for both tenant and owner-occupied properties.
Councilman Henry?
I was just going to make a comment when you said that the roof is the Achilles heel of the Baltimore row house. One of the other things that came up a lot during the conversations around rental inspection and licensure is that with row houses, because they're row houses, if one house has a problem like mold due to water damage or water leaking into that home, it is very likely to become a problem for the adjacent homes, because that's what happens when your house is literally built right next to somebody else's house. And that's one of the things that makes the mold issue especially pernicious. So thank you.
Any additional questions? I see the General Services had a report. Do you have any comments for us?
Good evening. Some WD-40 on that. I know, right? I should carry a can around with me and just whip it out. Good evening. My name is Chichi Niaganash. I'm the director of the Department of General Services. My response is brief, and that is because the only interest that DGS has in this is that because we operate the buildings that into which the public enters. So we are not involved in any mold issues in private homes and private properties. However, again, we are cognizant that we do have citizens coming into our buildings, and so we do have a stake in this. So DGS has on staff an environmental remediation team whose only job is to respond to service requests that come in from residents in our buildings, which is our fellow city agencies of any environmental issues such as suspected mold. We do not do the remediation ourselves. We have on staff a contracted environmental remediation contract company that will come out and do the remediation for us. However, that is on the back end. After it has already been identified and we then need to respond and try and remediate it, we try and be forward thinking and put in place proactive measures such as preventative maintenance and doing spot checks and especially inspecting the buildings that we know, much like Achilles' heels in private homes. In city buildings, our roofs are an issue for us. So for the buildings in which we know that we are trying to deal with leaks, incessant leaks, we try and pay a bit more attention to those to ensure that there is not a buildup of mold. For any employees who reach out to us with concerns about health risks, we defer to the city's Office of Occupational Safety. And if we do get those calls from constituents about mold issues in their homes, we pass that information on to our colleagues at DHCD. And we just want to put on the record that we support this inquiry, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute to the conversation on the important resolution.
Thank you, Councilman Henry.
Yes, first of all, I want to thank you very much for coming, and the way that this resolution was constructed and the way this hearing was planned out, it is specifically to focus on mold in housing, but we are aware of the fact that that is a legitimate concern in office buildings as well, and we will probably have conversations on how the commercial and governmental impact of this would work as well as the council continues to educate itself on the topic.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Thank you.
And then before we go to health and to law, I know HCD is here, but does anyone want to speak on behalf of the Housing Authority? Or yes. Okay, great. Thank you. Please.
Good afternoon, William Wells on behalf of the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. We also fully support the aim of the bill and the hearings. The Housing Authority is slightly different in that we directly run some housing. We have a oversight of private management of other housing in the city, and then we work with landlords and voucher holders through our Housing Choice Voucher Program. Altogether, through public housing and the voucher program, we house or help to be housed over 26,000 families in the city of Baltimore. Each of those three areas has a very different relationship in terms of how the Housing Authority performs inspections and remediation. The RAD properties, or the privately managed properties, since the Housing Authority does not do the on-site maintenance at those properties, that's the purview of the private manager that runs those properties. So our oversight role then is if a resident feels as though they're not getting the service that they need from the management company, to step in and assist that resident and enforce the contract under which the private manager operates the development. For public housing, it's a little bit different. So we maintain maintenance staff at all of the currently 13 public housing developments, in addition scattered site developments, which are either small or single-family row homes throughout the city. Each one of those has their own unique challenges in terms of maintenance. Our procedures are to check for the presence of odors, moisture, the things that indicate, and again, as some others have testified, we don't actually test for mold, but we try and be cognizant of the things that could lead to or provide an environment where mold would grow. We do have a specific operating order that was put in place in 2015 to specifically address mold in public housing, how the site maintenance staff will respond, what procedures they will take, how residents will be notified, and how any issues that are discovered would be remediated. So we can certainly provide that to the committee as well. Finally, we have the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is actually a program that encompasses many different types of vouchers across the city, traditionally known as the Section 8 program. Under the 24 CFR, there are specific guidelines that HUD mandates for us to check for. A housing quality inspection, or HQS, is the standard that HUD mandates for the Housing Authority to inspect. We have our own inspectors that work out of the Housing Choice Voucher Program. They perform 3 different types of inspections. An initial inspection, which is when a voucher holder comes forward and says, "I've found a rental unit that I want to lease up," and we will work with the landlord to perform that inspection to HUD standards. Mold and odors and discoloration and moisture are some of the things that are included in the HQS inspection. During the time that a tenant is under lease in a unit, we'll perform annual inspections. These are to the same HQS standard that HUD mandates. In addition, there are special inspections. They're different. They are only for a specific issue in a unit, and that could be requested either on the part of the tenant or the landlord, and we'll dispatch an inspector to look for that specific problem, whatever it might be. In this case, HUD outlines HQS standards that define specifically issues that are emergencies. Most commonly, we treat the we can't say presence, but something that looks likely to be mold or the conditions that would lead to mold as that kind of issue, and we issue a 24-hour notice to the landlord requiring that the issue be abated within 24 hours. If those remediations are not followed, then the landlord faces having the contract pulled and will assist the voucher holder with finding a new unit.
Any questions? Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Slightly tangential, but I did see that the list for the vouchers has been closed, the Section 8 list that was in today's paper, and right.
That was actually a preview of the closing of the public housing waiting list.
Right.
The HCV list has been closed for some time for the same reason. The demand so far outstrips the supply, that the weight on the wait list is unreasonable.
Right.
And we suffer issues of people falling off the list because we can't contact them, and it leads to a much more difficult time getting people housed.
Right.
But yeah, what appeared in the Sun this afternoon was for the public housing waiting list.
Yep. So on that note, that raises pretty significant concern. Again, we know the list is enormous to begin with, but folks who are suffering from homelessness, folks who have had lead or mold in their domicile, just wanted to hear from you attempts being made to expand options. While I've got you here, just want to make sure we are pressing, and I do understand the reasoning for closing the list, but it's definitely a concern.
Sure. Let me try and pull apart a couple things that I think I hear in your question. One is that we have internal transfers for a number of reasons that don't actually go back to the wait list. Right. They would very often have a higher priority. For instance, health and safety, VAWA or Violence Against Women Act complaints. Those would be transfers within the existing inventory that would not be impacted by the waiting list because they would supersede the waiting list. In terms of expanding capacity, the housing authority is always looking for ways to expand affordable housing in the city. Currently, we have a set number of units and are not funded at a sufficient level by the federal government to undertake an expansion of units.
That is of deep concern and, is a major challenge.
Yeah, as an agency that's in the business of affordable housing, we certainly recognize the lack of affordable housing in Baltimore, and we're committed to working with other agencies and partners to expand those options.
All right, thank you. Councilman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I had two questions. One would be for both the Housing Authority and HCD around in both of your comments. You mentioned that you don't test for mold. Can you elaborate as to why and what the barriers to doing that are?
I guess the first one would be training and lack of laboratory facilities. So we are trained, or our inspectors are trained to look for things that could presumptively be mold, and we treat them as though they are. There are cases where we will send samples out to be tested, but I couldn't say off the top of my head, the number or how that would occur. But it's really, if we approach what looks like mold as though it is mold, rather than waiting for test results and that sort of thing, that's the protocol that we have in place.
Okay. So I'm a little confused because if people are being trained to identify sort of what it seems like an additional step, if you're treating something that looks like mold, smells like mold, I'm missing the why they wouldn't be testing to confirm what the inspectors are seeing.
I couldn't say off the top of my head why that was the decision. I think it was the most conservative decision. If it looks damp, if there are water stains, if there are stains that could be, then we remediate it as though it is.
Well, actually, this winds up actually being a good segue because we want to get health department involved as well. So, Paul, can you come up, health? And thank you, Bill.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. DePaul Nibber on behalf of the Health Department. To very quickly touch on your question, so with respect to mold, it's kind of a tricky situation in that we kind of rely on the EPA and the CDC to give us guidance on mold, and specifically what kind of mold and how much mold would be potentially toxic to individuals, and there's just not that guidance. So testing becomes kind of tricky around that situation, in addition to it's really resource intensive, both from a funding aspect as well as just the time that it takes. And there's also some reliability issues there from what I understand. But as far as the health department is concerned, our primary touch point with mold as it relates to our agency report here is through our asthma program. The asthma program will help individuals remediate mold in their home if it's reported, because we do have evidence that it exacerbates symptoms amongst our asthmatic population. But in addition to that, we also know that that there's still underlying issues that could contribute to that mold issue, specifically moisture contamination, just moisture making its way into the home. And so we do help our asthma program participants with respect to going through the housing process to make sure that the property owners are following through on their promises to actually fix these sort of structural issues that are leading to the mold in their homes. So that is the majority of what we do around mold in the health department. I am joined by our Deputy Commissioner, Mary Beth Haller, so if you do have any additional questions, we can both tag team and answer them as needed.
So my understanding is that there'll be a presentation later on this in the hearing? Okay, so I'll hold any further questions until the presentation. I did have a follow-up on the LIGHT program. Can you, is the same reason for not testing what we just heard from housing's perspective? Also, can you speak to the prioritization process of providing funds for that program? Can you talk a little bit about that? The selection process for grant recipients for the LIGHT program, the extent of mold that would be required, that kind of thing. Can you just elaborate a little bit further there for us?
So to start off, our inspectors, so we have different inspectors or field staff for each program. So the Office of Rehab Services has a rehab tech. We have lead risk assessors for lead hazard reduction, and we have weatherization auditors for the weatherization program. Our funding sources require those specific certification programs for those specific funding sources, and per the funding source for weatherization and lead hazard reduction, anything it is stated in the operating manuals of those anything for the appearance of mold, that would be considered a health and safety issue that we would then have to send out for testing, and that would have to be addressed before we can do these other interventions in the home. There is no specific funding source for mold testing. We have to kind of, like I said before, when we're addressing that house for weatherization and doing the weatherization audit, if we're in the home and there's knob and tube wiring, potentially the appearance of mold, potentially 3 windows that might be broken or some other issues, then we wouldn't even move forward with the testing of mold, because the health and safety dollars wouldn't cover all of the items that are needed in order to fully weatherize that property. So we can't spend the money per state and federal regulations unless we're fully weatherizing that property. So we can't take that health and safety dollars and just address mold or the knob and tube wiring and then leave. We can only address it if we have the money to do everything that's required in order to pass the house for the weatherization. Does that help on that component? Yeah. And then in terms of the funding, so the funding that we have, the applications that come in through the LIGHT intake and assessment unit is a single application that is utilized for all of 3 of those programs, which each program then has a second tier of additional application items that are needed and utilized. And we see everything on those applications, from roofing repairs, plumbing issues, sewer and water line backups. Some people just want a deferred loan to renovate their kitchen or renovate the bathroom. We see disability access, ramps, porches, stairs, etc. And we do triage the list for no heat is one of our, we're in no heat season right now, so we try to use the limited funds that we have for no heat. We also look for older adults over the age of 65, and we partner with our partner organization for the Housing Upgrades to Benefit Seniors program to try to leverage additional outside dollars to get assistance for that older adult in that household. But overall, the funding to support those programs, to provide the additional level of work that is needed is limited. And we just, that's currently why there is a list right now of about 727 of the LIGHT intake and pre-apps.
And then last question, Mr. Chair, is it a first come, first serve
It is. It's
list?
first come, first serve, with attention being paid to emergency situations. I mean, we had a family just the other day where they were on the list trying to figure out how to move money around because there was a roof collapsing. So it is, an older adult that's disabled that suddenly, like, now has the ability to know about the program and hasn't been able to leave the house for 2 years because they don't have a ramp to get them outside of the house. So we try to leverage to get those things taken care of.
You good?
Councilman Cohen.
Any specific, do you bump families with kids on that list or no?
Yeah, we prioritize it's older adults, and then if there's family with children in the home, especially around no heat season, and then with other specific specific issues that would address that, like no water, sewer line breaks, water line breaks, no heat, roofing conditions are prioritized. But like I said, the funding is extremely limited. We just can't address what the need is.
And I know we have a panel of folks who will be testifying, but is there anything from law or finance before we go on? All right. So going down the list, and thank you for providing this, Councilman Henry. First, Kevin Lanier. Is Kevin Lanier here?
I see him. I'll go get him.
Okay.
I think it's Granville, but I'm not positive.
Hello, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon. Please state your name and we'll go ahead.
My name is Kevin Lanier. I reside in Baltimore City.
If you pull the microphone up, just a little bit. Perfect. Thank you.
My name is Kevin Lanier. I reside in Baltimore City. If I can take a little bit of your time. I listened to a lot of the comments that were said about funding and not having money and things of that nature. But we reside in Baltimore City, where we've spent thousands and thousands of dollars for red light cameras in areas that may need it, may not need it, but at the end of the day, it's used to generate income. That's part of public safety. Mold itself is a part of public safety. This is a visual of a property that I'm residing in that has sustained improper mold remediation. What I mean by improper is the city was notified in 2018 about a violation that involved water. They sent out an inspector. Upon the inspection, the inspector noted 7 different locations throughout the perimeter of the apartment building. Not my apartment, it's the apartment under me. And so therefore, in the midst of all of that, they noted the violation, they cited, and the management company was given the opportunity, timely 30 days to make necessary repairs. To date, being November the 13th of 2019, that apartment is still empty. A whole 17 to 18 months later. But the problem is this: with improper mold remediation, what happens is when you don't test for mold, and when you cite the appearance of no mold, what you do is you give the larger corporations, businesses, the opportunity to not take care of things properly. Again, this is the residence that I live in. This is something that I breathe every day. This is a mask that I wear when I'm in my apartment since January. And unfortunately, when you're under contract in these residencies, you're unable to get out of them because of loopholes and situations. And these inspectors who simply say, we don't know exactly what to do, or it's not really called mold. Let me tell you a little extra story. When I put in a complaint through Baltimore City, this is what the management company did after I filed my complaint. They called me on a Friday. Baltimore City called me on a Friday to tell me that my inspection would be on a Wednesday. Obviously, they called them on Monday. And on Monday, this is what they did. And what happened is they had the inspector come through, noted mold, the appearance of mold, and they had a contractor come in remediate the situation. Well, what the contractor did was he went in, cut out the border of the wall 6 inches. When the water damage and the sustaining areas that you noted was 21 inches up the wall. I know this because I do this for a living. 24 years working in the medical facility. So I understand building maintenance, building protocols, things of that nature. When the company or the management just got the violation for mold, this is what they did to remediate the apartment that is below me. This is what I lived under, and this is what I breathed through my ventilation system. After having this tested, it was determined that it was rag wool, rust, gypsum, quartz, and mica. Those components actually make up joint compound, which is a known class 1A carcinogen. I've been breathing this. And so once being hospitalized, being discharged, feeling better when I was in the hospital and going back home, I didn't know exactly what was going on. So I, in turn, spent my hard-earned dollars, $600, to have a mold test done that include air quality samples, surface samples, and visual samples as well. With all of that being said, I in turn went through the court system and I did a failure to pay rent. Why? Because I talked to Councilman Henry's office. I sent a letter to Deputy Commissioner Braverman, Michael Braverman. I've sent a letter to Mr. Hessler's office. I've sent letters to Senator Murray Washington's office. I've sent letters to the EPA, OSHA. I went to Washington Boulevard to locations, and I went as far as getting in contact with a person in the Maryland General Assembly. I've sent letters to the governor's office, city council's, mayor's office.
So, Ms. Lanier, I do thank you for bringing not only the pictures, also testimony. I know we're getting a little short on time, but I just wanted to hear you out. Absolutely.
In a matter of 4 months, this is all the information that I've accumulated and letters that I have written to persons who have the ability to make a change. And we say and we talk about funding, but at the end of the day, the EPA has guidelines that we can make management, residential properties hold true to. They are simple, as if there's a lot of information on mold, but nobody in this room actually holds management companies accountable when you just cite the appearance of something and they do absolutely nothing to it. So then you take it a step further. I in turn went to court where a judge looked at my test results, my mold results, and simply throws the paperwork in the air and says, I don't know what that is. And when I made an attempt to explain it to her, she deemed it not a health issue or concern for which my money should be in escrow, but go downstairs and file an escrow hearing, which I did. That's the first time. The second time I went to court, I filed escrow hearing. An inspector came in my apartment. He didn't see anything. When I got to court, me being the plaintiff, the judge never allowed me to state my name. He asked the inspector, did you or did you not see anything that warrants as a health issue? And the inspector said no. But the inspector is not in my environment. The inspector does not know that I tested positive for mold allergies. The inspector does not know that I have been out of work and misplaced for the last 11 months. I can't turn on my heat because the dust particles from downstairs come into my system, and my apartment has been as hot as 86 degrees during the summer. And now it's winter, and my apartment has been as cold as 66 degrees. Why? Because I can't turn on my air, nor can I turn on my heat. We talk about there's no training, when at the end of the day, there are companies that certified staff members that manage properties, the staff members that maintain those properties, and as well the judges and the inspectors that do these inspections should be trained as well, because there's a residential mold certification inspectors course as well. So we can't sit up here and say that there's not enough information and that there's no monies, but at the end of the day, we find the monies to do any and everything we want to, when as long as it generates money, but not to invest it towards public safety. So at the end of the day, who stands up for us? Who is the voice that says they're wrong and you're right? Especially when I've addressed letters to 15 different persons and government agencies, and I've gotten no reply from any of you. None of you. Most of you I know by face because your photographs are pinned on the website, but I can cite your names. Why? Because I've spent the last 11 months researching, calling, writing, visiting for persons to sit up here and say, it's not my problem. Why? Because you don't have it in your house and your family's not dealing with it. And it's not in this grand building. However, we have regulations for school and other commercial buildings, but we do not have enough for the 50% of Baltimore residents who actually are renters.
Mr. Lanier, I'll just say I appreciate not only your testimony, but your passion and the details you provide.
No, that's not passion. This is my life and my health, because I don't know what I'm going to have to deal with from the remaining of my life for inhaling a carcinogen for the last 11 months. And nobody came and addressed an issue of any kind. My management company never even sent staff into my apartment to see what the issue was. And the only way it's going to happen is if you guys who have the power make them do it. We can't. We pay our rent and we pay our taxes so that you can help us. That's what your job is. And if you don't want to do your job, at the end of the day, as my employer would say, there's the door. Our tax-paying dollars support you. We didn't actually authorize all these speed light cameras and school cameras, but you guys invested and spent the money in that with no problem. And I don't think anybody here voted on it or will ask questions about it. So at the end of the day, put the money where it needs to be.
Thank you, Mr. Lanier. Megan Carenful.
Hi.
You want to bring the microphone down?
Yeah, I know I'm a little short.
Thank you.
All right. I will try to be brief. My name is Megan Vanessa Carenfil. I'm a medical research and patient advocate with degrees in molecular biology, biochemistry, and bioinformatics, and I'm a patient who has been severely affected by mold as well. I moved into a newly renovated rental home in 2015. At first, everything was great. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to pass out because, unfortunately, that is a consequence of mold, is that
your,
Can we let her sit down at the
yeah, actually, is that possible, please?
number 7? Turn on the microphone. No, she's got, it's fine, fine. Yeah, okay. Take that mic.
A consequence of mold is something called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which when you stand up, all of your blood goes to your feet and you can't get blood to your brain. So sorry, it takes a little while for it to calm down. I went on vacation, I came home, and I walked in the door and I got hives all over my body. I knew, thank you, I knew that there was something wrong in my house. I didn't know what it was until the next day when I walked downstairs to do laundry and I saw that there was sediment on the floor and there was splotches on the wall. I immediately called my landlord. She sent her handyman out who assured me it wasn't mold, that it was just a little flood and it would be fine. The next couple of days, the mold spread to different parts of the walls. I called them again, they wouldn't do anything, and I had to hire a mold inspector to come and prove that it was mold before they would do anything. I told them the proper procedure was vacuuming and whatever the mold person had told me. They refused to do any of that. They scrubbed the walls with bathroom cleaner and they painted over it. That caused things to be worse for me. I got hives. Many times I ended up in the hospital for allergic reactions and things many times. And you know, that flood didn't reoccur for a little while. Water damage did keep occurring in the home, flood after flood over a period of a number of years, and I was getting sicker and sicker. My landlord expected me to mop up inches of water. I was using a walker at the time. I texted my landlord and said, hey, you know, can you please have somebody come clean this up? And her reply was that, well, I'm at a concert. I'm sorry, there's nothing I could do. My mom had to come help me one day mop up the flood, and she got very sick for months after as well, and we were, had to go to the emergency room several times and be stabilized because of some of the neurological effects that it had on us. I didn't know that it was the mold making me sick. A lot of the mold was in the HVAC unit and in things that weren't visible. I didn't notice. I didn't know what mold looked like. I thought there was just some, there was some cigarette butt-looking things on the wall, but I didn't know that could be mold. But I did tell my landlord, and I did tell, people, it kind of smells musty. I had them come several times. I even called the city, and they noted the water damage, but they said they couldn't cite anything to do with mold. They couldn't do anything to do with that, but they did cite her for water damage, which she did not correct. I used to be a person who was quite a foodie. I used to go all over Baltimore and eat everywhere, and I was reduced to eating formula, then almost having a feeding tube, and losing the one thing I enjoyed in life most. I had neurological issues. Besides the highs in the throat closing when I would try to eat some of my favorite foods, the stomach issues because of the neurological issues, I couldn't eat and absorb meds. I wasn't able to sleep properly, and severe temperature intolerance. I'd be sitting in front of an 80-degree heater shivering. Flu-like pain, bone pain, my legs were going numb. I couldn't stand my low oxygen, low respiratory rate, a lot of lung symptoms and headaches, eye itchiness, dryness, night sweats. The swollen glands, the symptoms go on, and I couldn't form a cohesive sentence for a long time. I'm actually usually a lot better than this, but I was exposed recently again, and I'm oversensitive to it now. My mom helped me buy a house, and the first night I spent there, a lot of the tremors had stopped, and within a week, I had relief of so many of my symptoms. So that's when I had somebody go back and test the house, and it showed high levels of very toxic black mold and other things. unfortunately, this house as well, it was a full gut. According to CHAP, they can only gut certain things, but the plumbing was permitted, all of these things. Unfortunately, they left an open pipe in the wall. It was closed by duct tape instead of being closed properly, and the city approved this, apparently, and it flooded. And ServPro came, and they did not do proper remediation, and I got sick from that as well, and I've been sick ever since. I have a home warranty with the builder, and they are refusing to come and do anything, even though that is supposed to be a legal document signed at closing. They will only do something if I agree not to sue them. I understand my situation is rare and complex, but I'm here to see if you could please help anybody that is in these type of situations, because it's awful. It's ruined my life. I have hope that I'm going to get better to a certain point, but I'm never going to be a healthy person again. I do have underlying health issues other than this, but I know certain things are from the mold because when I got out of it, I healed to a certain point. And as a person who is a scientist and who is out of work, I have done my due diligence in researching and what I can do to get better and what the causes are. And they're right. There's a lot of gray areas in this. What does mold cause? What does this do? What is the limit that is, okay? What is not? And I'm so sensitive now. I went to an Airbnb the other day, and I walk in and my face swells and I get hives all over, and I don't know what it is. And the family comes home and tells me, "Oh, we had a bunch of roof leaks." I'm like, everything looked fine. So a lot of times, things that are repaired are not repaired properly and not tested properly. And some people are healthy and they're not going to have, as much of a problem. And sometimes they're just going to get headaches and think they're sinuses or things, and they might not know. But I really appreciate you taking the time for this, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
First, I want to say, Ms. Karenfeld, thank you for sharing your story. I'm sorry to hear about, this ordeal that you've been dealing with, but just along with even the previous testimony, we appreciate you coming out and being not only a face, but a voice to this issue and making it very tangible for not only us, but also the agencies as well. If there's no follow-ups, again, thank you again.
Thank you very much.
I know from a legal point of view, we have Neil Bixler.
I thank you for the opportunity to speak about this important issue. I've been practicing law for about 25 years now, and I live and work in this great city of Baltimore. Unfortunately, in 2008, I myself became sick from mold exposure in a water-damaged building that I'd moved my law firm to. And ever since, I've dedicated part of my practice to trying to help others deal with this complex issue. As I was listening to some of the agencies speak, I picked up on a common theme which I was already aware of, unfortunately, but is that agencies don't test for mold. That's a huge problem because mold, by definition, spores are microscopic. And sometimes you can see visible mold, but oftentimes you can't. It's behind the walls, it's underneath the flooring. So testing is something I'm going to address, and some of the other speakers are as well. But there are very reliable, very reasonably priced ways to test for mold. And testing post-remediation is important because that's the only objective way to know if the remediation was done properly. So I'm going to quickly just address kind of the state of the law as I understand it in Maryland right now. The state of Maryland actually formally recognized the serious health effects associated with indoor mold exposure back in 2002 when the governor put together what's called the Maryland State Task Force on Indoor Air Quality and issued a written report, which is available online. And it states in part, quote, mold growth in buildings can have adverse health consequences. And it went on to state, quote, some molds have also been shown to produce toxins termed mycotoxins. These mycotoxins are really the scary part when it comes to mold exposure. They're highly toxic, and certain doses can cause real big problems that you'd want to avoid. The law in Maryland already protects residential tenants from conditions which present, quote, a substantial and serious threat of danger to the life, health, and safety of the occupants of a dwelling unit. That's found in the real property article, the Maryland Code, section 8-211. And the statute goes on to say, quote, it is the public policy of Maryland that meaningful sanctions be imposed upon those who allow dangerous conditions and defects to exist in leased premises. So we have the statutory authority on the state level already to do what is being proposed. Furthermore, the public laws of Baltimore City likewise expressly state the following, quote, it is found and declared that there exist in the city of Baltimore structures used for human habitation which are or may become in the future substandard with respect to the structure, equipment, or maintenance, and that such conditions constitute a menace to the health, safety, welfare, and reasonable comfort of its citizens. Furthermore, the city code also uses the same general test that the state code does, dealing with, quote, serious threat to the life, health, or safety of the occupants. All my pens are falling. So, with that said, in the state of Maryland and in Baltimore City, there are requirements already for landlords renting to residential tenants to prevent conditions which present a serious threat to the life, health, or safety of the tenants. Therefore, I believe there should be legislation enacted in Baltimore City that requires landlords at the time of the mandated inspections that were already discussed to also simply do proper mold testing. This is not a huge obstacle, and it could save thousands of dollars in the health of thousands of citizens. Fortunately, and this will be addressed in greater detail later, I suspect, there exists a DNA-based mold test that takes just a few minutes to perform. It is very accurate, and it is reasonably priced. It's called a PCR DNA mold test. If the PCR test detects what's called an abnormal indoor fungal ecology, then a further inquiry to locate and ultimately remediate the water source in mold can be performed. In the long run, this protects landlords from damage to their property and from legal liability for lawyers like me having to go after them to do the right thing. It protects tenants from getting sick, losing time from work, and having their personal belongings contaminated by mold, which you've heard from some of the other speakers. And it saves lots of money in healthcare costs associated with mold exposure. I often hear some people claim that mold, quote, is everywhere. But that is only partially true. There are different species that are in our everyday environment. That's true. We need it for the biology and the ecology of our world. But the species that we're talking about here today are very limited. The PCR test that I described tests for 26 very specific species of mold that are known to grow indoors when you have elevated moisture levels, okay? And these species are known to make people sick and to produce mycotoxins. So we know what to do. We have a reasonable way to test for it. I've been doing a fair amount of calling around to see kind of bulk rates. It looks like the PCR test, if ordered in bulk by several different nationally recognized labs, is about $150, okay, which is a drop in the bucket compared to the cost to society and people's lives that mold issues are causing. So I appreciate everyone's time and attention and focus on this, and I'll just conclude by saying what I say to a lot of my clients who have been exposed to unhealthy mold. One person's wealth is not more important within your health. Let's address this problem in a reasonable manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bixler. Steve Sinat?
I have WD-40 in my van that can fix this problem if you like. My name is Steve Sinnott. I'm the owner and chief inspector for Century Home Inspections. Sorry. I don't get the opportunity to speak a lot in front of a bunch of people, so bear with me, but I'll do the best I can. Over the past year, my company has performed 921 actual inspections, from rental inspections to real estate inspections. If you can look at it, we'll look at it for you. That's our motto. I have 3 professional inspectors. All of us are retired from our original careers. And we found a passion in Baltimore because we all know the city very well. I spent 35 years selling shoes in Baltimore, and so I've been to every part of the city. You guys probably know the company Shoe City was my former employer. About a year and a half ago, actually less than a year and a half ago, the city announced a program where third-party inspectors would start doing inspections on rental properties so that we could make sure that everybody in the city has a healthy environment to live in. And for the first 6 months of the program, actually up until February of this year, when the inspections were required for people to get licenses by January 1, the program kept being revised. Different things were taken off, different things were put on. As home inspectors, too many of us worry about personal liability and as to what we inspect, and we look at things as they are in that day, in that moment when we're inspecting it. When I was trained as a home inspector, I was trained first and foremost, number one is to think like a drop of water. And if you can think like a drop of water, you can find where water settles, and you can find where water does damage. Water is our enemy. Whenever I do a home inspection for a real estate transaction, the primary focus, number one, when you walk in, is the roof, or when you walk up and get up on the ladder and take a look at the roof. Our protocols for city inspections have nothing to do with the roof, and so we never get up there and we never take a look at it. We can only observe from the inside. The problem with observing from the inside is leaks from the roof can be covered up with paint. But the other problem is that you cover it up with paint, the mold is still there. Unless it's taken out and it's taken out properly, the mold is still there. It's very hard to detect, and you know, I feel for Megan and Kevin simply because they're victims of unintended consequences. I don't know if people were trying to do the right thing or not, but I can tell you right now, I've been in apartment buildings, let's say for instance, Bizzuto properties down in Harbor East. I do all Bizzuto high-rises. There are certain companies that manage this problem extremely well. Okay, we were doing a sampling of Bizzuto properties, 28 properties at the Promenade, and we found a leak in a condensation line. It was like the red alarm bell went off in that place. People went crazy, they went at it hard, they went at it fast, and they fixed the problem as quickly as they could. The flaw was they never tested for mold. We don't know if a mold issue existed there. We don't know if a mold issue exists there today, but they understand the seriousness of the problem. They probably did independent testing knowing them. They're very good managers. I manage a number of, I work for a number of management companies. One has 400 properties here in the city. The other one I fired about 3 months ago has about 100 properties in the city. The first 20 that I inspected all failed for a number of reasons. GFCI, water leaks, windows that didn't open and close, chipping and peeling paint. By and large, if I do a lead inspection in a property, the basement is a problem for a couple of reasons. If you have chipping and peeling paint on a lead wall, it's generally because of moisture coming through the foundation, which then leads to the obvious. I fired them because they got their inspection fails from me and never, ever repaired anything. Call after call after call after call. What are we doing? They said to me the landlords would not step up, that they're managing for would not step up and do the right thing and get these properties fixed. I had to move on. But then I have another one that has the 400 that I'm working on in the city. The second they see a problem, they snap to. They get right to it. So there are guys out there that are good. There are guys out there that are bad. you want me to talk about the inspection form that we deal with. There's one section of the inspection form that talks about water. Do the plumbing fixtures leak? Okay, do you see any active leaks? So we run the water, we get our flashlight, we look at the P-traps underneath, we run the shower, we run the, hit the toilet, and if we see any water come out, then we fail them because of the water problems. There's a section at the end, which is very general, section Q, which says, do you see anything that could affect the health of the tenant, all right? I can tell you right now, of the rental inspections we've done, I've failed 64 for that specific reason. I don't know that the other inspectors are being this diligent about it. I had the luxury of, having Neil as my brother-in-law, I guess. His son is married to my daughter, and we have a granddaughter together. And with that comes Neil's passion, and with Neil's passion comes education. And so it's become a real focus for me, simply because you want to do the right thing, I can tell you that if there's a small problem and we fail a property, okay, let's say if I have a GFCI outlet that's not working, I'll shoot a picture and I'll say, send me a picture and you're good, okay, if we make sure it works. Whenever there's a water problem, even though we don't charge for re-inspections, I go back and I look and make sure it's fixed the right way. I don't know, it's not required of the other inspectors. I don't know if the other inspectors are handling it the same way. There's a lot of us out there. I know that landlords are concerned about what it costs, because you've got a number of landlords that are treating this like a business. It's a P&L statement, and every time I walk through the door, it's an expense for them. To get in compliance with the city, it's about $350 for lead and a rental inspection. The repairs they do go back into that. You've got a lot of kids here that have bought houses that can't sell them, that are now becoming landlords for the first time, have no education on this type of maintenance, okay? And so I spend a lot of time educating people about it. I get pushback because people want to paint over the mold and consider it to be gone. I go back and I put my moisture meter on the wall. If it dings again, that's about the best I can do. I don't have the luxury of doing the test that Neil's recommending, or a test similar to the one Neil is recommending, which I think if there's a trigger for water, then there needs to be a screaming red light that says mold, because that's the next natural step, okay? I was inspecting a house the other day, and this was for a real estate transaction right here in the city. Beautiful rehab, top to bottom, inside and out, great. It looked like your typical Home Depot renovation. The tile was all the stuff I've seen before. By the way, I renovate houses too, but not in the city, out in the county. So I know the tricks. And we went through everything, top to bottom, looked like a winner, blah, 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 so on and so forth. If I could show you the pictures of the inside of the HVAC system, the fan, and even the casing on the blower motor were all covered with mold. So from appearances, it looked beautiful, but you just scratch the surface a little bit, which is not part of our rental inspection requirements. It's amazing what you can find. I believe that getting inspectors with this limited, everybody, the price has gotten beaten down in the city and so on, and we're very competitive, and honestly, we're not trying to get rich and retire. I'm already retired. We're not trying to get rich on this. If you start putting those types of requirements in there, where we have to pull covers off of air conditioning units and take a look at fans and that sort of thing, it's going to become a whole nother, ball of wax. But if you add the test, we don't have to do that, and we can still find the problem. So, there you go.
Well, I'll just say, Mr. Sanat, thank you not only for your testimony, but also the expertise as well, and that experience. That's very informative, I know for myself, and I'm sure for others, so thank you.
Sure, my pleasure.
Eric Cass.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to speak here today. I am a local industrial, excuse me. I'm a local industrial hygienist. I've spent the last 10 years performing inspections and environmental testing and restoration in and around the Baltimore area. I have with me the World Health Organization guidelines for, excuse me, my phone just, World Health Organization guidelines for indoor air quality. And I'd like to read just a brief passage from the abstract. Microbial pollution is a key element of indoor air pollution. It is caused by hundreds of species of bacteria and fungi, in particular filamentous fungi, growing indoors when sufficient moisture is available. This document provides a comprehensive review of the scientific evidence on health problems associated with building moisture and biological agents. The review concludes that the most important effects are increased prevalence of respiratory symptoms, allergies, and asthma, as well as perturbation of the immunological system. The abstract concludes with the most important means for avoiding adverse health effects is the prevention or minimization of persistent dampness and microbial growth on interior surfaces and in building structures. So, in my experience over the last 10 years, I've had the opportunity to go out and review lots and lots and lots of properties across the city, in the county, in the state, and in the District of Columbia, and in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And there does seem to be a universal and fundamental failure in the way inspection and testing work is done. I have heard everybody's experiences in the room, and I am here to tell you that there are ways of performing systematic, widespread, functional assessments of mold and dampness in buildings that will successfully identify and help begin the process of elimination and eradication of moisture intrusion in these buildings. I have also heard from numerous groups here that testing is expensive and it's inefficient, and that they are relying on processes of visual delineation. I actually don't disagree with that process at all. I think if you go into a property and you see a problem, it's quite all right to proceed based on your visual findings. What I would bring to light is, in many, many cases, we have properties where visual inspection actually produces no significant findings. Occupants of these buildings are still in a situation where they're lodging complaints that they don't feel well. I'm hired as an independent inspector, and I come in and I do find significant evidence of water intrusion and or mold growth that has not presented or manifested itself in visible areas of the home. There are very reasonable tools and tricks to perform these investigations. There are lots and lots of educational opportunities that are available to curious and ambitious inspectors. And it has been my experience that a thorough investigation is not necessarily an uphill battle. It does not need to be extraordinarily time-consuming, and it does not need to be extraordinarily expensive. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Councilman Henry.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that. Would you be able to testify to what the cost of remediation would be? I'm definitely getting now from several sources that the testing can be done at a reasonable cost. What I'm trying to get a sense of is, if the test is positive and there is mold that needs to be dealt with, what's the range of cost to the landlord for actually dealing with it properly? Like, if you, like, not just painting over it, not just pretending it's not really there. How much does it cost to really fix it?
In this theoretical context, it's quite difficult to answer that question. It would depend on the extent of water intrusion and the extent of mold growth. If you're talking about a 5 square foot area, that's a patch of a corner of the roof. Are we talking about removing the sheetrock and the associated insulation, sanitizing the space and putting it back together? If that's the case, then we're probably somewhere in the $500 to $1,500 range. But as the World Health Organization, and I think everybody else involved in this business understands quite well, the only way to permanently fix this is to eliminate the source of water intrusion. So if you're talking about what we have all now come to understand as the Achilles heel, Now we're talking about a roof repair. I'm not a certified roofer. I can't comment on what roof replacement or repair costs, but as a homeowner, I can tell you it's quite painful. But it doesn't always have to be the case. I mean, I have worked in programs with the city before in previous positions where we have established unit rate pricing to go into these things. And you could have lots and lots of contractors submit unit rate prices under some type of program, and the costs for these things would be scaled and understood, and it would protect property owners and managers from extraordinary financial losses and have really an ability to gauge what their costs are going into these projects.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Zafar Shah.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Councilman Bullock, members of the committee. It is a privilege to be here, and I really thank Councilman Henry and Councilman Bullock for their leadership in putting this together and following up on a lot of concerns that renters have in this city. My name is Zafar Shah. I'm an attorney at the Public Justice Center, which is a nonprofit civil legal aid organization that provides legal information, advice, and representation to over 700 Baltimore City tenants each year. We're part of the Baltimore Renters United Coalition, which has come out today wearing green or holding green signs to show that renters in the city are unified in asking the city and urging the city to take action on mold, especially in rental housing. The bulwark of tenant representation at Public Justice Center occurs in district court eviction, defense cases, and in actions which compel or seek to compel landlords to conduct repairs of substandard conditions in rental housing. Those cases are called rent escrow actions. In both eviction and rent escrow matters, mold is an ever-looming issue. It may be the reason why our client's child had to stay home from school, which prevented our client from appearing in court. It may be the reason our client gives up a viable claim against their landlord because they know that they can barely breathe inside the property and won't make it another week waiting for a court proceeding. In 2015, Public Justice Center conducted a study of 300 renter households facing eviction, and we found that nearly 3/4 of those renter households had complained of severe housing defects to their landlord and were then sued for non-payment of rent despite the landlord's failure to repair. And in that study, mold was ranked 4th among all severe defects reported by these tenants, superseded only by rat infestation or insect infestation, peeling or flaking paint, and leaks in the property. And so of these high prevalence defects, mold is the only one that is categorically omitted from our housing code, the property maintenance code adopted by the city. And this omission leads to questions that go well beyond the question of should mold be a violation cited in an HCD report. Baltimore City does not prescribe how remediation of mold should be occurring in our city. And there are no standards or guideposts in our city code. Importantly for renters, this means that there's no black letter protections. There's no certain safety net for renters dealing with mold defects in the property. And so what's left to ambiguity and conjecture and discretion at multiple levels is what is the appropriate method for remediation? What precautions must be taken for safe remediation that does not expose occupants of housing and workers in these instances from toxic mold that becomes airborne during repair? What is the acceptable length of exposure for a tenant even as they're waiting for a landlord to conduct remediation, whether it's at the behest of an HCD violation report or a judge's court order? There are no current answers in the city code for these questions, but it's not just city code that leaves renters in a lurch. Even at the state level, in 2008, the General Assembly enacted a licensing scheme for professional remediation services. That law actually sunsetted on July 1st of this year. Even when it was in effect, it had carve-outs for landlords who conduct their own work at their own property and their agents or handymen who they regularly employ for maintenance work. So the question before the committee is not just whether the city should do something about mold, but also it's important to ask what will happen if the city doesn't do anything around mold. And Public Justice Center knows from our clients that Baltimore renters struggle with the impact of mold defects almost as though they're being gaslighted. They're told by pediatricians and doctors that the mold in their homes is making them ill, making their children ill, and that they need to leave the house or ask the landlord to repair the property. But when they talk to landlords or housing inspectors or to agency officials and even to judges, they're told the opposite. They're told that mold poses no danger, that it's not a violation of code, and for the lack of law and policy on this issue, the city has conceded to myth-making, and these are myths generally perpetuated by property owners and management companies. These are the myths that my clients hear every day. This mold is your fault. You should be better at keeping your house. This mold is not a threat to your health or safety. You just have allergies. Buy a couple fans and dehumidifiers at your own cost. Problem solved. We used bleach on the mold and then we painted over it. Problem solved. Since the city says there's no violation, what else can be done? Pay the rent or move out. And this type of savage thinking, in my opinion, has seeped not just from the marketplace, but then also seeped from that marketplace into the court of law. In the rent escrow cases I was talking about, this is the predominant thinking about how mold defects should be tackled, even when there's been a violation made by the city and presented to the court. And this just can't be the operative approach for the renters in this city. Public Justice Center urges the committee to explore and ultimately enact measures that bring about consistent, assertive, and protective measures for investigation of mold and remediation. Guidelines for inspection of mold should enable HCD to cite mold as a violation in an inspection. And standards do not need to be scientifically exact. I don't know if that is, as someone testified, a prevailing thought. But when we have rats in a property or cold temperatures in a property, we're not asking for scientific proof of whether those pose threats to health and safety. We know it is. We need to empower inspectors to know when an instance of mold is a violation and to identify the severity of the violation in terms of a 5-day, 10-day, or 30-day violation. So for instance, a Class 1 mold defect may be a 30-day violation, while a Class 2 defect is a 10-day violation. We need that type of distinction. We need to require training and provide tools for HCD inspectors to investigate mold beyond surfaces on which mold is visible. Inspectors need to be empowered by law to conduct the air quality testing that others have testified to know under what conditions air quality testing is appropriate, and they should be empowered, the agencies should be empowered to require landlords to remove sections of wall, ceiling, or flooring for the purpose of real investigation of severe mold defects. We need to create remediation requirements to ensure that repairs of mold defects are conducted safely and in a workmanlike manner. City law should prescribe how mold is remediated, set forth the precautions that limit exposure to airborne mold during remediation. We need a scheme for mold remediation that establishes timelines, requires permitting, and sets forth mandatory methods for repair and post-repair testing. The city can look to the New York City Council, which in 2018 passed what they called the Asthma-Free Housing Act, which required certain remediation steps in rental housing based on not just the presence of mold, but also on the tenant's condition of asthma, COPD, or lung cancer. Our city code should answer questions such as when, if ever, is surface cleaning sufficient to remediate mold? When is the use of professional remediation services necessary? When is air duct cleaning necessary? We need to provide tenants temporary and permanent relocation during remediation or because of the inability to remediate. The city must require landlords to provide temporary alternative housing in certain instances of mold remediation or pay for the tenant's permanent relocation. HCD should be empowered to bear that cost if a landlord can't, and then seek that cost as reimbursement from the landlord. And finally, we need to model after what has been done effectively in lead risk reduction in housing, such as enabling medical professionals to initiate HCD or health department action to correct mold defects. We need to enable medical professionals to report what they know about children or the elderly or other patients, and that report would then trigger certain city action at the departmental level to either notify the owner of a severe mold defect or require an inspection of the property. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Henry.
I'm sorry, I just had one question from early on in the last part. Were you saying that inspectors needed to be able to open the walls in order to do testing or in order to do, or were you saying that people who were doing remediation had to be empowered to open the walls in order to remediate?
More of the former. I think if we empower inspectors to investigate thoroughly, it would require them in some instances to have to remove whatever barrier there is that is preventing the course of their investigation. We have to get past
the reason I'm asking that part
level.
specifically is because my understanding of previous testimony was that we're talking about airborne spores, and so it is possible to test for them even without the actually cutting into the walls, because if you're not if you're being exposed to it with the wall there, then you can test for it. And why would you need to open the wall to test? I can get why you're going to potentially need to open the wall to remediate once the test has come up positive, but I'm unclear on why you would want to open the walls to do that testing when the whole point is the danger is airborne.
Well, Councilman Henry, I don't know about the effectiveness of certain tests in every instance, and I think that the main point I'm making is that we have to get beyond surface level visibility tests.
Okay.
If we're not going to do, if the city's not going to do required air quality testing that works, then it may be that for an investigation to occur, there would have to be some removal of the surface.
It sounds like the problem is, well, at least one of the problems is the city isn't requiring air quality testing at all.
Correct.
So it's not a question of is the city doing insufficient air quality tests. It's that we're not. I think the bigger issue is we're not doing it. I don't need to get. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't mean to get into a back and forth. I just wanted to check to see if I had heard that properly, and I get what the point you're making there.
And I think it's a point well taken in terms of having the flexibility, but again, looking at air quality testing. So definitely thank you for that testimony.
Thank you.
Ludine Green. Sure. I know we're running a little short on time, but yeah. Sure. Thank you. Please state your name as you come up. Thank you.
Taryn Lilly.
All right.
I appreciate the council for letting me come out tonight to express my grievance. I live in Robinwood Townhomes, 2708 Virginia Avenue, 21215. And basically I'm here tonight to express I've been exposed to mold through my landlord's negligent behavior, and also another grievance is I'm actually in court right now due to this issue, but because of the partial inspection, it's on paper it's not for mold. It's actually for something else, so I'll explain the story. So the first time we realized we had mold was actually when we first moved in. It was June of this year. We had a severe leak that the landlord was privy to prior to us moving in there. It was a leak from the HVAC unit near our kitchen. It's only a 2-level where we live at. So the entire rug was soaked, and when we came in there, they basically covered it up. It wasn't all the way done. So around July, we noticed that the baseboards where the wall around where the HVAC was starting to rot out and like turn a certain color. And actually the wall itself was starting to turn black, like growing with like some type of spore looking material. So we had, they cleaned the flood up, and basically they came out there sometime in September after us making them knowledgeable about it in August. And when they came out there in September, luckily we was home because we actually recorded when they had took the wall down, and like the gentleman that first spoke, they like went up a certain height to take out the mold because it basically came from where the water was coming from off the floor. And when they took the mold out, they had basically, they didn't notify us that it was any mold there or how to go about proper ways to, I don't know, take care of ourselves. We're living in that environment and that type of stuff. So basically, when they came to extract it, that's the same month, September, that we put our rent in escrow, right? So when we put our rent in escrow, it was for that particular complaint. So when the inspector came out to actually view it, the walls were open from September 18th to October 4th. The walls were open and exposed. You could see the beams in the house. But by the time the inspector came there, they had actually closed it up. And but when the inspector got there, she couldn't visibly see what we was complaining about. So she wrote down something about a violation that we didn't even really know was there because it was so minuscule, right? So, but it was still present because the origin of where the mold was not taken care of. They just removed the sheetrock. So the origin, what I mean by origin is actually where the HVAC unit was placed. It was on top of a wooden box, right? So the wooden box was actually rotted out and had mold still, present. You could see the remnants of the mold. So she came, she wouldn't even look at it. Like we basically begged her almost to just walk 5 feet and look at what we were complaining about, and she didn't come. So that was the first visit, which was October 4th. We went to court. If it wasn't for me speaking up in court and actually complaining about the original problem, they would have marked it off for, I believe it was a violation around how the dry vent was hooked up. So it wasn't even going to be the true complaint of what we had. So from then on, they came out the 26th of October, and when they came out the 26th, they had, she did the same thing. She came, she didn't check it, and she left out. She basically checked the dry vent. She didn't even check the original problem, which we complained about. So, I mean, at this point, like, I just feel that for us to be in this predicament, and it's not through our own admission or neglect of something we've done, and if you really think about it, the irony of it is that when I'm pretty sure everybody in this room, when you're home, that's one of the most safest places that you want to be, right? So for me to feel like I'm not even safe within my own home due to something I didn't do, I mean, to the point where I don't even necessarily want to turn on the HVAC because that's what's controlling the ventilation throughout the house. So if I feel that mold spores, well, not even feel, I saw them with my own eyes. Mold spores are present right there at the HVAC. Who's to say that it didn't travel throughout the house to see? I mean, my son, he has a severe asthma condition. When we first moved in there, we noticed that it flared up, but we just took it as, okay, seasonal changes, is getting hot, so, you know, we didn't even really take it so much as a threat. But now, to know that it was due to being in an inhabitable place, that they knew that this problem existed before we moved there, I mean, that's just complete neglect. And to see that I was also failed by the state when the inspector came through and they wouldn't like properly view or review what was the actual problem, that was another failure. And I mean, I haven't done anything to negate, you know, to cause this. So, I mean, I stopped paying rent because they wouldn't fix the problem. I mean, they literally just fixed the problem last week because on the 26th, we had, when they removed the sheetrock, like I said, they didn't take care of the origin of the problem. So I went myself and paid $250 for a mold test, and it still showed, and this was as of October 26th, that it was still elevated levels of mold within the house. And that was an air sample that was conducted right next to the HVAC system. So, I mean, it wasn't even a post-remediation or follow-up remediation conducted until we went to court and emphasized that it still wasn't done. So, and like I said, they didn't even properly notify us that it was even present to begin with. So because we went to court and basically threatened to not pay, that's when they formally acted upon it and actually removed the HVAC unit that was leaking and caused the entire situation to occur. So, I mean, at this point, like I said, I don't think that anybody who, you know, should experience anything like that within their household.
No, well, absolutely agree with you, and thank you again for your testimony.
Yep, no problem.
Ms. Green?
Thank you, Chairman Bullock. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Good night, considering that we've changed the time and it's now feels like it's later in the day. But my name is Ludine McCartney Green, and I'm a family advocate attorney and manager at Green and Healthy Homes Initiative. I definitely want to give thanks for putting this issue at the forefront, to be the fact finder and to educate your committee on that, because that's definitely important when deciding the issues to address. So let me just not be too repetitive. We talked about mold. Just from the Center of Disease Control Prevention, it defines mold as a fungus that can be found indoors and outdoors. But mold is commonly found in damp areas, and we've heard about poor ventilation. The reason why I'm coming from the perspective of Green and Healthy Homes is that we have been known as having a long-standing history of advocating for families on important issues of lead poisoning. In addition to that, we're starting to notice also environmental hazards in the home, such as mold. What that environmental hazards is doing is, or the presence of mold is, what that does is establish that there's a trigger in the home. And once there's a trigger in the home, it triggers asthma episodes. And we have known that in our services when it comes to helping our community and our families in low income and providing services, that these home-based triggers are entirely preventable. Now, it's one thing dealing with something that's not preventable, but when dealing with an issue that can be preventable, is something that we should look into figuring out how to deal with it. In addition to that, mentioning that mold is a trigger for asthma, asthma is the leading cause of school absenteeism in 2008. And in 2013, that percentage was 49%. So obviously you say to yourself, if I have a child in Baltimore City that's spending more time in the emergency room than the classroom, there's an underlying problem, and then also societal implications of that as well. From a perspective of looking at some of the cause and effect and some of the long-term correlation, I wanted the committee to keep that in mind. So mold is a threat to life, health, or safety. Some of the prior testimonies mentioned that, and as an attorney representing clients in rent escrow and in rent court, obviously looking at the law to be a guidance and to be able to instill some authority and enforcement. And what I notice is that there is not, right? There is none there. Looking at Baltimore City local laws and knowing that the presence of mold or mold itself is not specifically stated or listed. That leaves us less empowered to enforce that in court. So one of the recommendations is to one, amend the public local laws to include mold as a threat to life, health, or safety, right? We've established that as a foundational purpose of that. And what I would say is, Houston, we have a problem. I literally looked through and I was like, where is it? Controlled find and searched throughout and could not find that. And we're not in Houston, so I'm going to say Baltimore City, we have a problem, right? So that was the first thing in terms of recommended solutions or things to come out of that. Two was to adopt the EPA or CDC mold remediation requirements. That's important to be able to say anything over the guidelines of 10 square feet needs proper remediation to be done. Because if not, if a landlord thinks it's a cosmetic issue where they just wipe and paint, that is not solving the issue. As opposed to that, it leaves a loophole. It's a paint and cover up job. And at this point, as you mentioned, we consider asbestos as very serious environmental hazard. Lead, right? Radon and carbon monoxide as top environmental hazards affecting homeowners and rental property owners. We need to consider mold and put that at the forefront. And lastly, I think we've talked about the air quality testing and requiring that as a part of the standards. I would tell you that we would support that as well to be able to move that to closer enforcement measures on that part so that they can cite those when appropriately. In the end, I just want you to consider that families who move into non-compliant rental properties are confronted with a dilemma of, should I stay in this property and let my child be more exposed to it? Or, do I move and do I have the resources? And just to keep that at the forefront, that families that I'm dealing with on a daily basis have to make those decisions, and they shouldn't have to. Lastly, don't feel alone in terms of New York City has actually passed legislation last year focusing on indoor allergen hazards. So as a precedent to be able to look at some of those things, I think GHI would be happy to help or to partner to put those things at the forefront.
Well, again, thank you for the push, but also thank you for your advocacy as well. It's very much appreciated. And also, for the next person, forgive me if I mispronounce your name, but Karen Wabiki.
Thank you, and good evening. At this point, my name's Karen Wabeck. I'm a resident of Baltimore City and an attorney with the Homeless Persons Representation Project. At HPRP, we represent people who are experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of homelessness. And as part of that work, we represent tenants facing eviction from subsidized housing in Baltimore City. And we've heard through the years from many, many tenants, just like the ones here today, that they have mold in their homes, and that the very systems designed to protect them from unsafe housing turn a blind eye when it comes to mold. I want to share two stories with you today from clients who could not be here to testify themselves. The first client is Roy. I met Roy in 2016. He lived in a HUD-subsidized high-rise apartment building in Baltimore City for 19 years. He'd been complaining of mold in his unit to the property manager and maintenance staff for several months. They repeatedly told him it was mildew, not mold, based on solely a visual inspection. They scrubbed the mold off the walls, sprayed the walls with bleach, painted over where the mold had been, and told him problem solved. But Roy was suffering from physical symptoms from exposure to the mold. He was a veteran, he had medical records from the VA documenting that he'd been complaining of a burning in his chest to his doctor ever since first noticing the mold in his unit. Roy filed an affirmative rent escrow complaint against his landlord, citing to the mold in his unit. Roy's case was my very first rent escrow case, so I was learning as we were doing this, and I was shocked to learn that inspectors from the Department of Housing and Community Development didn't actually test for mold. As you've heard, they just look for the appearance of mold. And so when they come back to re-inspect, if there's no longer the appearance of mold, say because the landlord's painted over it, there's no violation. And that's how Roy's landlord and landlords across this city are getting away with doing nothing about mold at the expense of tenants. That wasn't acceptable to Roy. So despite only having a monthly income of $779 in Social Security disability benefits, he spent $200 to have mold testing done in his apartment. I spoke with the mold inspector afterwards, who told me I could smell it the moment I walked in his apartment. I couldn't find it because they kept painting over it, but they eventually found and were able to swab in the HVAC vent. They found what looked like mold there. They took air samples, they sent it off, and the report came back showing that indeed there were unsafe levels of several different types of mold in Roy's apartment. Roy was dogged in his determination and efforts to hold his landlord accountable for mold in his unit, knowing that if it was in his HVAC vent, it was everywhere in that building. And he was looking forward to a hearing in his rent escrow case where the mold inspector was set to come and testify. Unfortunately, I got a call from his landlord's attorney 5 days before the hearing that Roy had passed away the night before. We'll never know what role, if any, mold played in Roy's death, but I still think about that burning in his chest and wonder. Fast forward 2 years, I met Sherry in rent court in Baltimore City. Sherry's a single mother of 4 children who has a Section 8 voucher. She's employed by a temp agency doing administrative work and was actually placed in a city agency. Her landlord filed a failure to pay rent complaint, alleging that she owed 3 months of rent. I represented her in the rent escrow case that we raised defensively because she had complaints that every time it rained, there were several inches of standing water in her basement that had caused an explosion of mold in the basement and then in the living room 1 level up. The Housing Authority of Baltimore City had already inspected Sherry's unit twice, and they found 10 housing quality standards violations. The Housing Authority abated their contract with Sherry's landlord, meaning they stopped making the subsidy payment. Legally, however, Sherry, as the voucher holder, she was still required to continue paying her portion of the rent, even though the inspector from the Housing Authority told her that it wasn't safe for her and her 4 minor children to stay in the home. Sherry's landlord sent someone out to look at the property that same day, and he also told her, if this was my family, I wouldn't stay another night in here. Sherry's 12-year-old son had chronic asthma, and his doctor also advised against him being in the home. When the inspector from DHCD went out as part of the rent escrow case, they found 4 violations, all of which were deemed to be threats to life, health, and safety, including the appearance of mold throughout the basement and the living room. Nonetheless, Sherry's landlord didn't do anything to address the mold. The Housing Authority gave Sherry a voucher to move, but as you know, that's a process. And in the meantime, while Sherry looked for a new 4-bedroom home in the city to rent, I asked the Housing Authority to provide temporary relocation assistance to get the family out of the house that was a clear threat to their health and into a hotel until their new place came through. The lawyer for the Housing Authority told me, we don't do that, and suggested that I contact Reggie Scriber's office at DHCD. My voicemail and email to Reggie Scriber went unanswered. No response. So instead, Sherry first paid to stay in a hotel for a week with her family, and then she rented 2 adjacent rooms in a house paid $300 a week to do that for a period of several months. The only way that Sherry was able to afford to find alternate accommodations is because the judge in her rent escrow case abated her rent to zero in recognition of the severity of the condition in her home. And I will say that that is the exception and not the rule, and probably was more a reflection of the fact that Sherry's landlord didn't show up to court than anything else. Over the span of 5 hearings in 4 months, the court abated a total of $4,813 in rent for Sherry. I'm happy to report that Sherry and her family are in their new home, free of mold for the time being. Thank you, Councilman Henry, Councilman Stokes, members of the committee, for taking this issue seriously, for the opportunity to share Roy and Sherry's stories, and I look forward to discussing next steps with the council to improve the lot of renters in Baltimore City. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know there are a number of people who are here to testify. I definitely want to hear your voices. I do want to make note of the folks who are holding the sign say housing justice now, because the reality is that we recognize these health issues are also justice issues, and we know that housing is something that we really have to take very seriously, and our homes are our castles and where we spend so much of our time. And so the health issues are really justice issues, so I do thank you for bringing that. And I think it's not coincidental those signs are also green. We think about green in terms of health and vitality. So I do thank you for coming out today, and thank you for all the testimony. I do know there's additional testimony, and at this point, we are not going, just let you know, as far as the resolution, we are not going to vote on it today, only because I believe there's significant work that has to be done on the city's part. There's a lot of testimony that came out today that talks about what the responsibility of the city is, but then also how we can then be creative about solutions. I know we've heard also about some of the financial implications, but also some details also around the rental licensing program and some ways that we can also be stronger as a city. So I want to leave it open as well, but at this point I will turn it over to the capable hands of Councilman Henry to again guide the rest of this discussion for today. But again, I thank you all for your attention and for your coming out this afternoon and this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were 2 of Mr. Shah's clients who we had expected to present. Are one or both of them still here? Okay, they're both here, and that would be Beatrice Bastiani? I'm sorry. Okay.
Good evening. Happy to be here. Thank you for listening and give me the opportunity to tell my story. My name is Beatrice Bastiani, and in March of 2018, I moved into 2324 East Federal Street, which is the east side, all right, and it's in Shannon Sneed's district. And ongoing joke for us is that my daughter is Shannon's daughter because they look so much alike. But we moved into this house with the hope that everything would be wonderful, our own little house. Found a place that I could afford. And so after it began, it rains, and we had a nice summer rainstorm, and that's my porch, but then I looked down in the basement, and all that nice water on the porch. Well, what you see is that picture I took after it receded from the steps in my basement. And that's what I began to understand. Wow, why do my neighbors keep saying nobody stays in this house very long? But I didn't think about much of it. So what I just did was I got out the wet vac, and you get there and you move your things out of the way, and you just hope it doesn't rain anymore. But of course it did. So now we're going through the summer, and in October I'm beginning to feel like, my asthma is coming back. Hadn't any problems with it, but I'm sneezing and I'm having trouble breathing. And I'm thinking, I feel bad when I'm in my house. It must be having something to do with the house. So I did talk to my landlord about it, and I said, I think you need to clean the air ducts. I think something is all up in it. It smells like mold, and I think it's all in the air ducts. And he told me, don't worry about it, because you don't have to use the heating ducts until heating season. And so he didn't do anything. Then I was looking around and moving some things that I didn't need. That's my coat and a pocketbook, and upstairs bedroom. Now we're not talking basement. We're talking first floor, second floor. I go up to the second floor, and I pull my coat out of my nice leather coat, out and it's got this dust on it. I'm like, no, it's not dust, it's mold, because it wouldn't come off. Then I began to look at other things, all kinds of clothing. I happened to drop something and look in my bedding, you know, pull up the sheet and everything like that, and under my box spring is now black and green. So I'm like, I got a serious problem. So I go out and I buy air filters, $100 at Walmart, okay? I got 3 of them because I had my daughter, Shannon's daughter, living there too, $100, right? And then I said, well, let me do something about the air ducts. So over the vents, I bought these little, 16 by 20 by 1, whatever. They cost like $8 a piece, $9 a piece. You get them on sale. I needed 11 of them for my house. So what I did, I'm watching and seeing, and once I did turn the heat on, all right, within a month, they were totally black. So I had to keep replacing them, all right? So I'm thinking there's something really bad. And we get to like November, December. Oh, that table over there, that was my grandmother's, and she used to put the candy in there, and if you were really good, she'd give it to you. Well, I fought 6 grandchildren for that table after she died, and it's totally destroyed. Mold, all right? Now, this is not in the basement. This is on the 2nd floor. So I'm hurting now, okay, financially, breathing-wise. I'm missing time from work. My daughter, who never had asthma, is now using an inhaler, and I'm saying, I'm a mother. I moved her into it. She didn't say, let me move there. She had no choice. She came, and this is what I've done to her. Now, the problem is, when you don't have a lot of money, and you're not Section 8, because see, you're Section 8, you get a voucher, and they'll let you move into these houses. But if you're not Section 8, landlords won't talk to you, and so there's not a whole lot of places to move to. So I'm like, let me hang in here, because I can afford this, and hopefully I can save some money. Now, toward the end of the year, I'm saying I want something done, and the landlord's now beginning to threaten me with court notices, and he's evicting me, and he's doing this and whatever. And so I'm like, I don't know. I know about certain things, but I don't know a lot about court. So I go down to court, and I'm like, I want to have my say. I want to be able to tell somebody, but I never get a chance to say anything. So in March, he was evicting me, and I'm like, oh no, I'm going to hold this money, and you're going to listen to me. And the judge asked me, she said, can you pay it? I said, yeah, I got the money in my pocket, but I want to tell you about what's going on in my house. I said, how long do I have to keep paying him money? Because what really got me mad was he was taking me to court for eviction, and I had the receipts that I had already paid him. So this time I just held the money, all right? And so I'm telling the court, and she says to me, well, take it to escrow. I said, what is escrow? That's the thing, you need to let people know what their rights are. So when I go downstairs, and then I happen to run into somebody from Public Justice Center, a lawyer, and they're telling me all about escrow and how I could hold the money. So I'm like, great, because I don't think it's fair that he keeps getting my money and I keep breathing all this junk. Things are just getting worse. So so I'm putting things in escrow. The inspector does come out, cites all this stuff, water in the basement, leaks and everything. I've leaned up against a wall, and the wall gave. Now, I think walls are not supposed to give when you lean against, but I have videos of water just coming down in the kitchen and everywhere. So we get the thing, it's going to get fixed, okay? Because I like my neighbors, and we can just stay there. He fixes it. That's March. Come April, he had his 30 days, nothing happened. He said he was coming, never came out. Come May, nothing is going on. So he finally gets somebody to clean the air ducts, but he doesn't fix anything else. And I've lost all kinds of personal belongings, can't let anybody come visit, no granddaughter, no visitors, and just concerned about my health, my present health and my future health. And so what happens is I get to talk to the lawyers at Public Justice Center, and they keep telling me, you keep going back to court and everything. Well, my landlord doesn't even bother to show up, so we can't move forward, all right? So now I'm just feeling just totally victimized, but I'm encouraged by Mr. Shaw, and they say, just hang in there. Everyone's saying, why don't you just move? I said, well, when you move, I still got to keep the escrow going, because otherwise they'll dismiss the case, and I'll lose all my money, and I don't get to say, get things fixed. I can't save enough money for deposit, security deposit, rent, and then where do I move to, So you got to get all that together. In the meantime, I was hoping that I would win my escrow case, and I said, I need that $3,000 or whatever, so I can move out of this place. We go to court in June, and I have a wonderful judge who said, well, I don't see the papers here, and I just, I don't think I believe your case. I broke down in tears, all right? I've seen all kinds of stuff, but I just cried and cried and cried. And they said, you have to come back another time. I'm living in this place. I'm sleeping with a mask over my face when I go to sleep, plus air filters. And then I'm sending my daughter away because I don't want her to get some kind of disease, all right? And I'm not the only one, all right? Because there's other people who live in houses in the same neighborhood, owned by the same landlord, who are going through even worse situations, okay? So I'm like, I'm gonna stand my ground, and I'm gonna stay to the end. Now, when we get to court in July, all right? We started in March, now it's July, and finally, it's not going real good for the landlord because he hadn't done anything, not one thing. And he didn't get fined, but he agreed to settle, say, if I move out, he will drop all the other cases and the escrow money can come to me. And I'm like, I've had enough. Let me get the escrow money. The reason why I feel like I can come here and I'm blessed and lucky is because I can afford. I make enough money. I'm not minimum wage. I make enough money that I can take off of work, come down to court, pay the parking, take off and not lose my job. And I can still put food on the table. But everybody can't do that. I can afford. I'm comfortable talking in front of people. And I don't have any issue with that. And I said, I'm going to speak not just for me, because I moved to a nice place, thank you, Jesus, all right? And it's a nice neighborhood here in Baltimore. I'm in West Side again now. I'm now for East Side, I'm over on West Side. And, but there are other people who are still in the neighborhood, still can't move, still putting up with mold. It's not dust. It's not you're a bad housekeeper. It's mold, and it just grows. And I didn't know that it would leave, I don't mind it being in the basement. I don't go in the basement. But I didn't know it would travel through your air ducts, get on all of your belongings, make you lose everything, plus you got asthma and the medicines and all that different stuff that you can't afford, all right? And it's in the house to stay. To this day, that house has not been repaired. I gave him the keys. He hasn't done a thing with it, and I don't think that's right. I don't think, and they say, what's he gonna do? Like he did for me. He's just gonna wait a little bit, and then he's gonna rent it to somebody else. There needs to be something to hold people accountable, landlords, whatever. I know it's expensive to remediate mold. It is. I tried bleach, I tried vinegar and everything. It's just really expensive. However, it's more expensive when the people in your city cannot breathe, cannot live healthy. They got to go to the doctors, and and they don't necessarily have the money. It increases health costs. All in all, the taxes that you didn't get because I didn't go to work cost the city. So I believe that I would like to have legislation that would make it important. You can't even cite for mold because there's no law against it. You can have mold. My inspector just said dark substance on the walls and in the basement. So it's not mold. Could have been ketchup. But it was mold. And so we really need to have something that will make you improve the housing stock. I don't choose not to be a millionaire, all right? But I choose to live in Baltimore City. So because I choose to live in Baltimore City, I believe that there needs to be something to help me stay here and to stay healthy. And that's basically what I have to say for tonight. I thank you very much for your time.
So we have a second client, Mr. Shah. If there's a way for you to maybe move the PowerPoint along a little further, because we do have some people that signed up to testify that aren't part of the panel, and we're getting past our official time. All right, so Ms. Ryan, Charmel, I'm sorry.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Charmel Ryan, and I appreciate that you're taking the time to hear my story. I rent in the 9th District, and I've been living in the home a couple of years now. For these last couple of years, it's been, the mold has gotten just totally out of hand. There's mold in the windows, mold in my kitchen cabinets, which eventually molded out my food. It's mold in the basement. It's mold growing in the carpet. I had mushrooms growing through my carpet. I asked the landlord to fix the issue, and he said he would only fix the issue if I was willing to pay him more. I was giving them $1,200 as it was a month. I started feeling sick. Me and my son both were coughing and congested, and it just got really bad. And the only reason why I noticed it, because when I would go other places, I was feeling better and not as sick. Right now, I'm living in a nightmare. I have everything that I own pretty much in boxes. That's to keep the spread of mold throughout my belongings. I can't keep food in the cabinets because it contaminates my food. Can't bring my grandbaby over because I'm afraid that she may get sick as well. And I went to the doctor, and he told me the only option I have is to move. So I'm really trying to find a new place, and I'm just recently have started buying a house. I urged the landlord to do something about the mold and the condition for more than a year. And he really doesn't think that he has to do anything. And anytime he does any work, it's a patch job. The mold has come back after a period of a week. It was right back. And most of it basically is caused from a leaky roof. After a few months of being there, I decided to stop paying the rent. Of course, I ended up in rent court. And when I went to rent court, I got some legal help from the Public Justice Center that explained to me the new licensing. And unfortunate for my landlord that he hadn't applied for the licensing. So I was blessed enough to not have to pay him. And then he still never came up with the, uploaded the lead certificate. He never registered the property with the HCD or passed a basic health and safety inspection. And then I come to find out that on October the 14th, he was issued a license. Why?
That's an excellent question, and one we will follow up on.
The new rental license law was meant to protect the renters like me, I thought, and somehow my landlord was able to get a home inspector willing to give the house a passing grade despite all the problems that the house had. The rental house is literally, you see the appearance of mold, you smell the mold when you walk in the door, and other than just being there, if you're in there any period of time, you're going to be sick. The inspector had an optional cite of mold issues and question Q in the inspection form, which reads, are there any other readily observable problems in the inspector's opinion presented in immediate threat to the health and safety of the occupant? And apparently he didn't write anything. So even the city inspector came out to the property, and she noted 8 violations when I called the city to come out and check, but all she referenced it as possible mold. And I was told that the city inspectors are not empowered to test for mold. And I asked city council, if it looks like mold, smells like mold, and makes you sick like mold, why can't it be reported? Because it's mold. And in my conclusion, they're not holding the property manager or property owner accountable for his actions. It's made me and my son sick. And if it hadn't been for legal representation from the Public Justice Center, my landlord may have evicted me, may have even got away with a patch job, or worse, collected rent for a house that was making me sick. So I think the law is not in favor of protecting the renters, and we need to do better in Baltimore, because I am a city employee.
Thank you. Ms. Ryan, I will tell you also that the law is supposed to be protecting the renters, but we will have to have some conversations about why the law is being enforced the way it is. I'm especially surprised that we would have a code enforcement officer find 8 violations in a property 2 weeks after it received a license in which it supposedly passed inspection. We probably should be having some conversations about whether there is some way we can have automatic triggers to assure us that when we get complaints about properties within a certain amount of time after them passing inspection, for the purposes of the licensure, we might want to look into who the home inspector was who did that, and maybe start looking into some other properties they did, which I can see Deputy Commissioner Hessler has already noted down to begin working on.
Immediately, because he took me to court twice, and in both times the judge said that he what was it, suspended the fine for prejudice.
Ms.
Both times, and then he turns up and has a license.
As the chair said earlier, I thank you for telling your story, and I also want you to know that your story is specifically now on the city's radar screen as one in which, even under the law as is, something else should have been done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm actually a pollution control analyst.
Okay, we may follow up with you on some other things then as well. That is the conclusion of the panel of testimony that we had solicited ahead of time. We have, I think, 2 people signed up from the audience. Is Rochelle Barksdale still here? No? Okay. And okay. Oh, no, that was Beatrice. Okay. Steve Lannon. Okay.
Hi. I know everybody wants to go home, so I'll try to be brief. I'm not going to talk as much about housing. I'm going to talk quickly about how mold affects people. Mold is a biotoxin. It carries biotoxins. It's actually not a biotoxin itself. And everyone's affected by mold in one way or another. If you're in a moldy house, it may take years for you to become symptomatic. It may take months. People have different levels of susceptibility, but it creates a biotax on your body. So, these residents of Baltimore City, like me, if you're suffering from anything else, your body's immune system has to divert energy to get this mold out of your body. It has to identify it, attach to it, and pull it out of your body every time you collect a spore, which is, in these moldy houses, is all the time. So if they're fighting cancer, if they're fighting the flu, if they're fighting anything else, their immune system is compromised, and it's going to be further compromised by the mold. Personally, I've moved 6 times this year due to mold. I have a certain susceptibility, which is shared by about 25% of the population. So just keep that in mind. 25% of the population has a special susceptibility to mold. You have to have a triggered event for that expression to happen in your life. I was perfectly healthy until 39 years old, and then the last 2 years I've been sick off and on all the time from mold. My expression happened from a spider bite, a brown recluse spider bite. It's a really weird thing, and it took a very long time to figure out. I worked for Johns Hopkins, and the Johns Hopkins doctors couldn't figure it out. It took a long time to work that out, but 25% of the people, the population, if they have that triggered event in their life, either a spider bite, a virus, they can become extra susceptible to molds, and they will have symptoms much, much sooner than anyone else. There's definitely people in Baltimore City that have that susceptibility and that have had a triggered event, and they don't even know it. They're going to be the biggest victims of this whole thing unless we can get something worked out with the inspections. I've been a resident, I've been a landlord, I've been on both sides. I understand both sides, but I feel like this is something that's super important to protect the residents. Landlords are just gonna have to buck up. This is something they need to fix. This is something that can't go on. Just seeing some of these pictures, it's ridiculous. I live in a place that's much cleaner than that, and I still react when there's a little bit of mold in the HVAC system, which spreads it around these houses. You get a little bit of mold, it gets in the HVAC system, it goes all over the house. And you have to get rid of all of your things if you're susceptible like me. I've had to get rid of all my things twice now. Yeah. It's not a fun thing to live with, but it's something that we don't have to be affected by. When I'm in a clean environment, I start healing, I start feeling better, and that can happen with anybody that gets out of one of these moldy houses. So I want to thank you all for your time. I know it's late. I just want a better understanding of the populace for what mold does to us. Even if we're not especially susceptible, it creates a tax on your body. Everybody's home has mold. You don't know how much, but it's affecting you one way or the other. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And also, as the chair mentioned earlier, normally it's our policy to, at the conclusion of a hearing, hold a vote. In this case, what the resolution was asking for is that an informational hearing be held. But I talked about it to the chair, and we're going to actually not vote deliberately so that we can leave the topic open, and we can come back and have further hearings and work sessions and conversations without having to have a new piece of legislation, all under the same overall topic of studying and educating ourselves to the issue of mold in housing. I want to thank all of you for coming and participating. Oh, I'm sorry, was there somebody else who had signed up?
I had signed up Karen Walker.
Here.
I came bright and early so that I could speak. Come on, Tiffany and Tisha. Hi, my name is...
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm still looking for you guys on the sign-in sheets. I'm sorry.
I was number one on the chart.
Oh, you signed, I think I know what happened, is there were multiple hearings here today. Some of you may have signed in on the sign-in sheets for the other bills.
Oh, okay.
And that have already been put away, and so I don't have access to those.
Okay, I apologize for that, but...
I'm sorry. Okay, no, we're going to let you testify, but I would ask if you could keep it to just a minute or two each.
Oh, I'm going to keep this short and sweet. Piggybacking on the gentleman that just left from in front of me, I'm speaking for the dead that died in the Bolton house because of the mold. Ray, I don't know if Karen's, Roy is our Ray, but the story is the same. People have died in the Bolton house of COPD, upper respiratory diseases, asthma. We have children in that building, and we have black mold in our building. How we pass inspection is way beyond my comprehension, especially when you got housing and housing inspectors in this building right now, and you're going to tell me that this place can pass inspection. I got a problem with it, okay? And that's all I'm going to say.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Tiffany Ralph. I am a tenant at 1100 Bolton Street, which is Bolton House Apartments. As Ms. Karen has stated, we have a serious black mold infestation from the roof of our building all the way down to the ground floor. We have had neighbors who have passed away from this exposure. I myself have developed mold illness. I have to put a special gel in my right eye every night because my eye is so dry that if I don't, I have to literally peel my eyelid off of my eyeball every morning just to open my eyes. That's one of the symptoms that I have developed from living in this building. I find it very funny that Mr. Costello got up to leave as soon as the mold topic came up because he is our councilman and we have reached out to him several times and he has not responded at all.
So if I could just interrupt for a second, I'm not normally in the process of defending my colleagues, especially certain ones, but I will say that this is technically a committee hearing. This is a hearing for the Housing and Urban Affairs Committee. Councilman Costello is not a member of this committee. He was here because he had a bill that was being considered, but he would not necessarily have been expected to stay for this hearing because he's not on the committee. Okay,
I hear you. We, his constituents, expected him to sit still.
Well.
And we, his constituents who voted him in, who are now working to vote him out, expected him to sit still. That's respect of the people who voted you in.
Understood.
Now, as far as the housing inspectors go, we have had several housing inspectors and health department inspectors who have come to our building. At one point, one of our neighbors who has now been, she was retaliated against from the management because she called the health department. The health department came out, the health inspector found 20 specs that we failed as a building, but yet 30 days later, everything was fine, miraculously. The housing inspectors, we have called 211. We have called the health department. We have called the housing inspector's office. And all we keep getting is, oh, we don't deal with that here. You need to call this person. Oh, we don't deal with that here. No, you need to call that office back. The problem is that nobody is being held accountable. And everybody's talking about budgets. My life does not have a dollar amount on it. I am priceless to my son. I am priceless to my family and my friends. Human life should not have a dollar sign attached to it, but that's what these agencies are doing. They're attaching dollar signs to us as individuals, and that's wrong. I don't know how you can look yourselves in the mirror every single day, knowing what is happening to the residents in this city. Shame on you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tisha Guthrie. I'm here as a tenant of Bolton House Apartments, but some of you may also know that I am a commissioner for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Commission. I'll make 2 quick points in reference to the dollar amount that is attached with mold, perhaps passing a resolution that requires the testing of mold. I am a kidney transplant recipient, 13 years. I was on dialysis for a year. $72,000 is what it costs for a resident of Maryland to receive dialysis, $72,000 a year. So consider that being constantly exposed to mold in my apartment puts my father's kidney, the kidney that he gave me 13 years ago, puts that at risk. If I were able to make it through the process, I would possibly be on dialysis again. Second of all, as was made clear, we do have regulations, we do have things on the book that give some kind of power to individuals to ensure that residents, again, over 50% of the residents of Baltimore are renters, give some authority to ensuring that housing is safe and habitable. And, you know, we all know that part of the problem is not just having policies, procedures, and legislation, but actually enacting them effectively. And we need to speak truth to power, and those people who are in positions of power need to ensure that your populace, the people who put you in these positions, are actually enforcing policy. When it comes to ensuring that financial support is put in place, we have these anchor institutions that reap the benefits of having a workforce in Baltimore. We have anchor institutions like Johns Hopkins Hospital, University, Maryland University. So it behooves them to become a part of the partnership and ensure that the people in Baltimore are healthy, are safe, and have housing that is habitable. This is a no-brainer, as was indicated before. This should be on par with lead poisoning, and there's no justification for people to live under such conditions. So I urge the council to prioritize, putting this in place and ensuring that mold is considered a toxin and something that should not be tolerated and should not be should not be privy to the residents of Baltimore. Thank you.
Thank you. I do want to make a couple closing statements as we prepare to leave. One is I actually had just had a conversation earlier today about the similarities between what we deal with as a society with lead paint and what we are looking at dealing with in terms of mold. I will point out in that regards, Baltimore City does not regulate lead paint. Maryland, the state of Maryland, regulates and addresses lead paint, and one of the benefits of that is it is not something that property owners in Baltimore City have to deal with as a potential competitive disadvantage for landlords in Baltimore County versus Baltimore City. It's a level playing field where everyone in the state is required to abide by the same rules in terms of how they keep their property. And that is one of the things that I think should be part of our public conversation about mold, which is, should we be focusing on trying to do something at the city level, or should we be focusing on trying to do something at the state level? The other point I would like to make is, as I said, I don't generally make a point of defending my colleagues, especially certain ones, but I will say in regards to the agencies, when it's on them, it's the job of the council and the people to hold the agencies accountable. And when we're talking about not enforcing existing law, that is something that legitimately the agencies are going to have to explain. When it comes to what they don't do and claim budgetary concerns over, that's another issue, because the truth of the matter is the agencies don't come up with their own budgets. They are given money that may have nothing to do with the amount of money they asked for. And there is one person in this city who makes the final decision on how much money should go into each agency to do each thing, and that is the mayor of Baltimore. This is a strong mayor town, and we are, I'm telling you this is literally the best time to focus the attention of the mayor on any issue that you feel is not getting sufficient support from the city, because we are inside the 6-month line from the coming municipal elections. And if the level of passion that I've heard here tonight was translated into making this an election issue, I think that it's one thing to feel like it's not right that the agencies aren't doing stuff for monetary reasons when we shouldn't be putting a price on life. But at the end of the day, if the city doesn't give an agency money to be doing tests, it's not like they have a choice about that. Their job is to do what they are told to do by the elected representatives. That's the mayor and the city council. The city council gets a budget that we can't add to. If you want money in the budget to do something, you got to get to the mayor, and now is a good time to do that. The last thing I'll say, other than thanking you all for attending this hearing is to please check the area around your seats to make certain that you have not left something that you came in with. Otherwise, again, thank you for being here tonight, and we look forward to continuing this conversation in the future. I probably don't need to tell you this, but the rest of City Hall at this point is closed. So please proceed to the first floor exit and depart the building with our gratitude. Oh, this hearing is recessed.